You lied to me, Rachel, and now everything is broken.
The phone rang at 11:47 p.m., cutting through the silence of my empty house like a rusty blade. I was in the basement workshop, hands deep in the guts of an old lock mechanism, when Lauren's voice crackled through the speaker with that particular brand of panic that makes a father's blood turn to ice water. "Daddy, we're in trouble. Mom and I are in the middle of nowhere. Please pick us up." I dropped my screwdriver, the metal clattering against concrete. 23 years of marriage and Rachel's girls' nights had become as predictable as tax season. But Lauren calling me at midnight from God knows where, that was new territory. "Where are you, sweetheart?" I wiped grease from my hands with an old rag, already reaching for my keys. "I don't know exactly. Route 9, I think. There's been an accident, Dad. Mom's hurt, and there's this man." The line went dead. I stared at the phone for exactly 3 seconds, my mind cataloging possibilities like I was estimating a construction job. None of them were good. I grabbed my jacket and headed for the truck, my boots echoing in the empty house that had felt more like a mausoleum than a home for the past few years. The rain started as I pulled out of the driveway, fat drops splattering against the windshield of my beat-up Ford. Perfect, because if my wife was lying in a ditch somewhere, we might as well add biblical weather to the mix. Route 9 stretched ahead of me like a black ribbon, and I pushed the truck harder than I had any right to. The engine protested, but it held together, unlike everything else in my life, apparently. My name is Eli Carver, and I've spent the better part of 4 decades learning that life has a sick sense of humor. I'm a construction foreman, which means I know how to build things that last and how to tear down things that don't. What I'd never figured out was which category my marriage fell into. The accident scene appeared around a bend like something out of a nightmare. Red and blue lights painted the rain-slicked asphalt in garish colors, and I could see Rachel's silver Honda crumpled against a guardrail like a discarded beer can. My heart hammered against my ribs as I pulled over and ran toward the chaos. Lauren was sitting in the back of an ambulance, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, mascara streaked down her cheeks like war paint. She looked up when she saw me, and the relief in her eyes was so profound it almost knocked me over. "Daddy!" She launched herself into my arms, and for a moment she was 5 years old again, crying over a scraped knee that I could fix with a Band-Aid and a kiss. "I'm here, baby. Where's your mother?" "They took her to the hospital. She hit her head when we crashed. Dad, I don't understand what happened. We were supposed to be going to dinner, but then Mom drove out here to meet some man, and he was acting all weird and paranoid. And then the police showed up and..." "Slow down." I held her at arm's length, studying her face. No visible injuries, thank God. "What man?" Before she could answer, a voice behind me cleared its throat with the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "Mr. Carver?" I turned to face a state trooper who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. His nameplate read Morrison, and his expression suggested he'd drawn the short straw for delivering bad news. "That's me. I'm afraid we need to ask you some questions about your wife's relationship to Miles Ashcroft." The name hit me like a sledgehammer to the gut. Miles Ashcroft. Real estate hotshot, local golden boy, and the kind of slick bastard who wore $1,000 suits to sell overpriced houses to suckers. I knew him by reputation. Everyone in Carver's Crossing did. What I didn't know was why my wife was meeting him on a dark highway at midnight. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, which was technically true. I didn't know. But I was starting to suspect, and the suspicion tasted like copper pennies and betrayal. "Mr. Ashcroft was found in your wife's vehicle with a substantial quantity of white powder, Mr. Carver. He's being charged with possession with intent to distribute. Your wife was unconscious when we arrived, but we need to understand the nature of their relationship." The world tilted sideways. Rachel, my straight-laced, rule-following wife, mixed up with illegal substances and Miles Ashcroft. It was like finding out your grandmother was running a meth lab. "I have no idea," I said. And this time it wasn't technically true. Ideas were forming in my head like storm clouds, dark and ugly and full of lightning. Officer Morrison studied my face with the practiced eye of someone who'd heard every lie in the book. "We'll need you to come to the station tomorrow for a formal statement. In the meantime, you should probably get to the hospital." I nodded, my mind reeling. Lauren climbed into the truck beside me, and we drove toward Carver's Crossing General in silence, the rain drumming against the roof like an accusation. "Dad?" Lauren's voice was small in the darkness. "Is Mom going to be okay?" I wanted to tell her yes. I wanted to promise her that everything would be fine, that this was all some terrible misunderstanding, that we'd laugh about it someday. Instead, I reached over and squeezed her hand. "We'll figure it out, sweetheart. We always do." But as the hospital lights appeared through the rain, I couldn't shake the feeling that nothing would ever be okay again. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a voice that sounded suspiciously like my own was whispering that maybe it was time to stop trying to fix things and start tearing them down instead. The emergency room at Carver's Crossing General smelled like disinfectant and desperation. Lauren and I sat in uncomfortable plastic chairs that had probably been designed by someone who'd never actually sat in one, waiting for news about Rachel. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry wasps, and every few minutes, someone in scrubs would hurry past with the kind of purposeful urgency that made my stomach clench. Family of Rachel Carver? The doctor who approached us looked like she'd been awake for about 36 hours straight. Her name tag read Dr. Patricia Wong, and her eyes held the kind of professional compassion that came with years of delivering news that ranged from bad to catastrophic. "I'm her husband," I said, standing up. "This is our daughter, Lauren. Mrs. Carver has a severe concussion and some bruising, but she's stable. She's awake now, if you'd like to see her." Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by something else, a cold, calculating part of my brain that wanted answers. "Can she talk?" "Yes, but she's groggy. The medication might make her a bit uninhibited." Perfect. In my experience, uninhibited people told the truth. Rachel's room was on the 3rd floor, and she looked small and fragile against the white hospital sheets. Her auburn hair was matted with dried red stains, and there was a bandage wrapped around her forehead, like some kind of twisted crown. She turned her head when we walked in, and for a moment her eyes were unfocused. "Eli?" Her voice was thick and slurred. "What are you doing here?" "You were in an accident, Rachel. Lauren called me." She blinked slowly, like she was trying to process information through fog. "Lauren. Oh God, is she okay?" "I'm fine, Mom." Lauren pulled a chair up to the bedside and took Rachel's hand. "But I'm confused. Who was that man in the car? Why were we meeting him?" Rachel's eyes darted between Lauren and me, and I could practically see the wheels turning in her pill-addled brain. She was trying to figure out how much we knew, how much she could get away with. It was a look I'd seen before, though I'd never recognized it for what it was. He's a business associate. We were discussing a property deal." At midnight, I kept my voice level, but inside something was starting to burn. "On a back road in the middle of nowhere?" "It's complicated." Rachel closed her eyes, and I wasn't sure if it was from pain or because she couldn't look at me while she lied. "Mom?" Lauren's voice was gentle but insistent. "He had illegal substances. The police found white powder." Rachel's eyes snapped open, and for a moment the fog cleared. I saw fear there, and guilt, and something else that made my blood run cold. Calculation. "I don't know anything about that. Maybe he put them in my car without me knowing." It was a pathetic lie, delivered with all the conviction of a child claiming the dog ate her homework. But what made it worse was that she was lying to Lauren, to our daughter, who was sitting there with tears in her eyes, trying to understand why her mother's life had suddenly turned into an episode of some trashy crime drama. "Rachel." I leaned forward, and she flinched. "How long have you known Miles Ashcroft?" The silence stretched between us like a tightrope. Outside, I could hear the sounds of the hospital, beeping monitors, distant conversations, the squeak of wheels on linoleum. Normal sounds from a normal world that suddenly felt very far away. "A while," she finally whispered. "How long is a while?" "Eli, please. I'm hurt. Can't we do this later?" "No." The word came out harder than I'd intended, and Lauren looked up at me with surprise. "We can't. Our daughter was in that car, Rachel. She could have been ended because of whatever game you're playing with Miles Ashcroft. So I'll ask you again. How long have you known him?" Rachel's face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she was going to tell me the truth. Instead, she turned to Lauren with the kind of manipulative desperation that made my skin crawl. "Honey, could you get me some water? My mouth is so dry." Lauren, sweet and trusting as always, jumped up immediately. "Of course, Mom, I'll be right back." As soon as she was gone, Rachel's entire demeanor changed. The fragile victim act disappeared, replaced by something colder and more calculating. "You don't understand the situation you're walking into, Eli." "Then explain it to me." She studied my face for a long moment, and I could see her weighing her options. Finally, she sighed. Miles and I have been involved for a while. It's not what you think. Really? Because what I think is that my wife has been screwing around behind my back. Please, tell me how wrong I am. The words hung in the air between us like poison gas. Rachel's face went white, then red, then white again. It's not like that. It's business, complicated business. What kind of business involves white powder and midnight meetings? The kind that could make us rich, Eli. The kind that could get Lauren through college without student loans and let us retire somewhere nice instead of dying in this godforsaken town. I stared at her, this woman I'd been married to for over 2 decades, and realized I was looking at a stranger. You're talking about dirty money. I'm talking about opportunity. Miles has connections, investments that... Stop. I held up a hand, and my voice came out as a whisper. Just stop talking. Lauren returned with a plastic cup of water, and the smile she gave her mother was so trusting, so innocent, that it broke something inside me. She had no idea that her world was about to explode, that everything she'd believed about her family was built on lies and betrayal. Here you go, Mom. Thank you, sweetheart. Rachel's voice was sugar-sweet again, the loving mother act back in full force. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. Lauren, we need to go. But Dad, now. Something in my tone must have warned her not to argue. She kissed Rachel's forehead and followed me out of the room, her footsteps echoing in the hallway. We didn't speak until we reached the truck. The rain had stopped, but the air still felt heavy and oppressive, like the calm before a tornado. Dad, what's happening? Lauren's voice was small and scared. Why are you and Mom acting so weird? I started the engine and pulled out of the hospital parking lot, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. How do you tell your 19-year-old daughter that her mother is a lying, cheating criminal? How do you explain that the life she's always known was built on a foundation of deception? I don't know yet, sweetheart, but I'm going to find out. As we drove home through the empty streets of Carver's Crossing, I made a decision. Rachel wanted to play games? Fine, but she'd picked the wrong opponent. I'd spent my entire adult life building things, creating order out of chaos, solving problems that other people couldn't handle. Now I had a new project, tearing down the lies that had poisoned my family. And unlike my usual construction jobs, this one was going to be personal. The house felt different when we walked in, like the walls themselves knew that everything had changed. Lauren went upstairs to her room, and I heard her door close with a soft click. I stood in the kitchen, surrounded by the detritus of a normal life. Dirty dishes in the sink, mail scattered on the counter, a grocery list in Rachel's handwriting stuck to the refrigerator. 23 years of marriage, and I'd never really known my wife at all. I poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon and sat down at the kitchen table, my mind racing. Miles Ashcroft. White powder, midnight meetings. It was like discovering that your quiet suburban life had been a front for something out of a crime novel. But this wasn't fiction. This was my life, my family, my daughter's future hanging in the balance. And somewhere out there, Miles Ashcroft was probably sitting in a jail cell, knowing things about my wife that I'd never suspected. I finished the bourbon and poured another. Outside, dawn was starting to creep across the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gray and pink. It was going to be a beautiful day. Too bad I was planning to spend it burning my old life to the ground. The next morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn clarity that made everything seem sharper, more defined. I'd managed maybe 2 hours of sleep, but I felt wide awake as I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that could strip paint and a yellow legal pad covered in questions. Lauren had left early for her classes at the community college, kissing my cheek and promising to call if she needed anything. The house felt hollow without her laughter, like an echo chamber for my growing anger. I'd made a list. It's what I do when faced with a complex problem. Break it down into manageable pieces, create a plan of attack. The list had 3 columns: what I know, what I suspect, and what I need to find out. The what I know column was depressingly short. Rachel and Miles Ashcroft, white powder, 20-plus years of marriage apparently built on lies. The what I suspect column was longer and uglier. An affair, pills money, God knows what else. The what I need to find out column filled an entire page. My phone buzzed. A text from my brother Tom. Heard about the accident. Rachel, okay? Need anything? Tom Carver was 3 years older than me and had spent most of our adult lives drifting from job to job, woman to woman, crisis to crisis. but he had a talent for showing up when things got complicated, usually with a six-pack of beer and a willingness to listen to problems he couldn't solve. I texted back, "Come over, bring bourbon." While I waited, I decided to start with the obvious questions. I went upstairs to the bedroom I'd shared with Rachel for over 2 decades and really looked at it for the first time in years. The dresser where she kept her jewelry and personal items. The closet where she hung clothes that seemed more expensive than I remembered. The nightstand with the drawer I'd never opened because married people were supposed to respect each other's privacy. That last part seemed quaint now. The nightstand drawer contained the usual detritus of a woman's life. Hand cream, reading glasses, old receipts, a small notebook with appointments written in Rachel's careful handwriting. I flipped through the notebook, looking for patterns, for names I didn't recognize. Miles appeared frequently, but not as Miles Ashcroft, real estate agent. Just M followed by times and locations, lunch at the Riverside Inn, drinks at the Marriott bar in the next town over. M, 2 p.m., usual place. I felt like a detective in a bad movie, but the evidence was right there in black and white. My wife had been meeting another man regularly for months, maybe years, and she'd been careful enough to use code names. The front door slammed, and I heard Tom's voice echoing through the house. "Eli, where the heck are you?" Upstairs, Tom appeared in the bedroom doorway, holding a bottle of Jameson and wearing the kind of grim expression that meant he'd already heard the rumors. In a town the size of Carver's Crossing, news traveled faster than gossip, and gossip traveled at the speed of light. "Jesus Christ, brother, what kind of mess has Rachel gotten you into?" I showed him the notebook. Tom whistled low and sat down heavily on the edge of the bed. "How long do you think this has been going on?" "I don't know, but I'm going to find out." Tom opened the bourbon and took a swig straight from the bottle before handing it to me. "What's your plan?" "I'm going to tear their lives apart, piece by piece, until I find the truth. And then I'm going to make them pay for what they've done to Lauren." "What about what they've done to you?" I took a drink and felt the whiskey burn its way down my throat. "I'm a grown man, Tom. I can handle being made a fool of. But they dragged my daughter into this mess. They put her in danger. That's unforgivable." Tom nodded slowly. He understood about family, about the lines you don't cross. "What do you need me to do?" "Help me figure out how deep this goes. Miles Ashcroft doesn't operate in a vacuum. He's got friends, business partners, people who know his secrets. I want to know everything about him, everything about his relationship with Rachel, and everything about whatever business they're involved in. That's going to mean talking to people, asking questions, making enemies." "Good. I'm in the mood to make enemies." We spent the next 2 hours going through Rachel's things with the methodical thoroughness of crime scene investigators. Her laptop was password protected, but I knew Rachel well enough to guess that she'd used Lauren's birthday combined with our anniversary year. I was right. Her email was a goldmine of incriminating evidence. Messages from Miles that started professional and gradually became more intimate. References to investments and opportunities that made my skin crawl. Photos of expensive jewelry and designer clothes that I'd never seen her wear. But the worst part was reading the messages where she complained about me. About our boring life, our small house, my lack of ambition. She painted me as a simple-minded construction worker who was holding her back from the sophisticated life she deserved. "Eli." Tom's voice was gentle. "You need to see this." He was holding a bank statement from an account I'd never known existed. Rachel had been moving money, large amounts of money, for over a year. Deposits that were clearly connected to whatever business she was conducting with Miles, withdrawals that suggested she was planning something big. "She's been preparing to leave you," Tom said. "This looks like she was building a nest egg." I stared at the numbers on the page, feeling something cold and hard settle in my chest. It wasn't just an affair. It wasn't just pills money. Rachel had been systematically planning to destroy our marriage, probably taking Lauren with her, and I'd been too blind or too trusting to see it. "We need to talk to Miles," I said. "He's in jail. Then we need to talk to his friends, his business associates, people who know what he and Rachel were really up to." Tom capped the bourbon bottle and stood up. "I know a guy who knows a guy. Give me a couple of hours." After he left, I sat alone in my bedroom, surrounded by evidence of my wife's betrayal, and tried to figure out how I'd missed the signs. But the truth was, I hadn't missed them. I'd chosen to ignore them. The late nights at work, the new clothes and jewelry, the way she'd grown distant and distracted over the past few years. I'd told myself it was a phase, that all marriages went through rough patches. I'd focused on my work, my relationship with Lauren, the comfortable routines that had made our life seem stable and predictable. Now I realized that while I'd been building other people's houses, my own home had been crumbling around me. My phone rang. Lauren's number. Dad, I just heard something weird at school. Jenny Morrison said her dad arrested Mom last night? That's not true, right? Jenny Morrison. Officer Morrison's daughter. Of course, the news was already spreading through Lauren's social circle like wildfire. Your mother wasn't arrested, sweetheart. She was in an accident. But there are some complications we need to talk about. What kind of complications? I closed my eyes, trying to find words that would prepare her for what was coming, without destroying what was left of her innocence. Come home after your classes. We'll talk then. Dad, you're scaring me. I know, I'm sorry, but I promise you, whatever happens, we'll get through this together. After I hung up, I walked downstairs and stood in the living room where Lauren had taken her first steps, where we'd celebrated birthdays and Christmas mornings, where Rachel and I had slow danced to old songs on lazy Sunday afternoons. All of it built on lies. I picked up my car keys and headed for the door. Tom was right. I needed to talk to people, ask questions, make enemies. But first, I needed to pay a visit to someone who might have answers. Miles Ashcroft's real estate office was in the fancy part of town. All glass and chrome and expensive furniture designed to impress clients with more money than sense. His secretary, a blonde woman in her 20s who looked like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine, greeted me with the kind of professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. I'm sorry, but Mr. Ashcroft isn't available today. Can I take a message? I'm sure he's not available. He's in jail. I'm Eli Carver, Rachel Carver's husband. I'd like to ask you a few questions about their business relationship. The smile disappeared entirely. I'm afraid I can't discuss Mr. Ashcroft's business dealings with unauthorized parties. Unauthorized parties? Lady, my wife was in his car when he got arrested for pills possession. I think that authorizes me to ask a few questions. She reached for the phone, probably to call security or the police or whoever you call, when an angry husband shows up asking uncomfortable questions. I leaned across her desk and gently placed my hand on the receiver. I'm not here to cause trouble. I just want to understand what my wife got herself involved in. Help me out here. Something in my voice must have convinced her that I was more desperate than dangerous. She glanced around the empty office and lowered her voice. Look, Mr. Carver, I don't know the details, but Miles has been acting strange lately. Nervous. He's been taking a lot of meetings with people who don't look like typical real estate clients, if you know what I mean. What kind of people? The kind who pay in cash and don't ask for receipts. Before I could ask another question, the front door opened and two men in expensive suits walked in. They moved with the kind of casual confidence that suggested they were used to getting what they wanted. And the way the secretary's face went pale told me everything I needed to know. Mrs. Patterson, one of them said, his voice smooth as silk. We're here to collect some files for Mr. Ashcroft. I straightened up slowly, every instinct I'd developed in 20 years of construction work, telling me that these weren't the kind of men you wanted to turn your back on. Gentlemen, I said, nodding politely. I was just leaving. The taller of the two men studied my face with the kind of attention that made my skin crawl. You're Eli Carver. It wasn't a question. That's right. You should be more careful about the questions you ask, Mr. Carver. Some people don't like curious husbands. The threat was delivered with a smile, but there was nothing friendly about it. I felt my hands clench into fists, the same hands that had swung hammers and operated heavy machinery for 2 decades, hands that knew how to build things and break them. Thanks for the advice, I said. I'll keep that in mind. I walked out of the office with deliberate calm, but my heart was hammering against my ribs. Whatever Rachel and Miles had gotten involved in, it was bigger and more dangerous than a simple affair. These weren't real estate investors or business partners. They were the kind of men who made threats in broad daylight and expected them to be taken seriously. As I drove home, I realized that my plan to tear apart Rachel and Miles's lives had just become a lot more complicated, because it wasn't just their lives I was dealing with anymore. I was walking into something that could get us all ended. That evening, Lauren and I sat across from each other at the kitchen table like negotiators preparing for a hostage exchange. I'd ordered pizza from Carmine's, her favorite place, but neither of us was eating. The boxes sat between us growing cold while I tried to figure out how to explain that her mother's life had turned into a crime drama Dad, just tell me what's happening. Please. She was wearing one of my old flannel shirts over jeans, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, and she looked so much like Rachel at that age that it made my chest ache. But there was something else in her face, something I was just beginning to recognize, a strength that came from somewhere deeper than genetics. Your mother has been having an affair with Miles Ashcroft, I said, deciding that the direct approach was the only one I could manage. It's been going on for a while, and it involves some kind of illegal business dealings. Lauren stared at me for a long moment, her face cycling through surprise, hurt, and something that looked like relief. I knew something was wrong, she said quietly. I've known for months, maybe longer, the way she'd get phone calls and leave the room. The new clothes and jewelry she said were gifts from work friends. The way she'd look at you sometimes like she was angry about something you'd done, except you hadn't done anything. Why didn't you say something? Because I hoped I was wrong. Because I wanted to believe that our family was normal, that my parents loved each other, that all those times she said she was working late or going out with friends were true. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. How long have you known? Since last night. I found evidence on her computer, bank statements for accounts I didn't know about. She's been planning this for a long time, Lauren. The affair, the money. Probably leaving us. What are we going to do? The question hung in the air between us like a challenge. What were we going to do? Roll over and let Rachel destroy what was left of our family? Pretend that 23 years of marriage could be dissolved as easily as a business partnership? We're going to fight back, I said. We're going to find out exactly what she's been up to, and we're going to make sure she doesn't get away with it. Lauren nodded slowly, and I saw something in her eyes that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with her mother all those years ago. Determination, fire, the kind of strength that comes from being pushed too far. What do you need me to do? Before I could answer, there was a knock at the front door. Through the window, I could see Tom's silhouette, and he wasn't alone. A shorter, stockier figure stood beside him, someone I didn't recognize. Stay here, I told Lauren and went to answer the door. Tom looked grim, and the man with him looked worse. He was maybe 50, with a kind of weathered face that came from too many years of hard living and harder choices. His clothes were expensive but rumpled, like he'd been wearing them for days. Eli, this is Danny Kowalski. He used to work for Miles. Danny stepped forward and offered his hand. His grip was firm but nervous, and his eyes kept darting around like he expected someone to jump out of the bushes. Mr. Carver, I heard about what happened last night. I think you should know what you're dealing with. We went into the living room, and I poured drinks for everyone. Danny knocked his back in one gulp and held out his glass for another. Miles Ashcroft isn't just a real estate agent, he began. He's a money launderer, has been for years. He uses property deals to clean cash for some very bad people, and your wife has been helping him. The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd suspected illegal substances, maybe some kind of investment fraud, but money laundering for organized crime was in a different league entirely. How long? I managed to ask. Your wife? Maybe 2 years. But Miles has been at this for a decade. Easy. He's got connections all over New England, guys who move illegal substances, tools, whatever pays. He cleans their money through real estate transactions, takes a percentage. Everybody's happy. Until last night. Yeah, until last night. Miles got greedy, started skimming. The people he works for don't like that. They sent some guys to have a conversation with him, but he panicked, grabbed your wife, and tried to run. That's when they crashed. I felt like I was falling down a very deep hole. The white powder in the car? Miles's personal stash. He's been using more and more lately, making stupid decisions. Getting arrested was probably the best thing that could have happened to him. At least in jail, his business partners can't get to him. What about Rachel? Danny's expression grew even grimmer. That's the problem, Mr. Carver. Your wife knows things. Account numbers, transaction details, names of people who don't like their names being known. If she talks to the police, a lot of very dangerous people are going to be very unhappy. And if she doesn't talk, then she's still a liability. Either way, she's in trouble. And by extension, so are you and your daughter. The room fell silent except for the ticking of the old clock on the mantelpiece. I thought about the men in expensive suits at Miles's office, about the casual way they delivered their threat, about Lauren upstairs trying to make sense of a world that had suddenly become very dangerous. What do you suggest I do? Disappear. Take your daughter and go somewhere far away until this blows over. Change your name, start over, forget you ever knew Rachel Carver. I'm not running. Mr. Carver, you don't understand what you're up against. These people don't negotiate. They don't give second chances. They solve problems permanently. Tom leaned forward. Eli, maybe you should listen to him. This isn't about pride anymore. It's about survival. I looked at my brother, this man who'd spent his entire adult life running from one problem to another, and realized that for once, he might be right. But then, I thought about Lauren, about the life she'd built here, about the friends and dreams and future that would all disappear if we ran. There has to be another way! Danny shook his head. The only other way is to make sure Rachel never talks, and I don't think you're that kind of man. He was right. I wasn't that kind of man. But as I sat there in my living room, surrounded by the debris of my old life, I realized I might be willing to become that kind of man if it meant protecting my daughter. Tell me about Miles's business partners, names, locations, how they operate. Mr. Carver, tell me. Danny looked at Tom, who shrugged. He's not going to let this go, Danny. You might as well give him what he needs. For the next hour, Danny laid out the structure of Miles's operation like a construction blueprint. The key players, the money flow, the properties used for laundering, the timeline of transactions. It was complex and sophisticated, the kind of operation that took years to build and could be destroyed in a matter of days if you knew where to apply pressure. The weak link is the documentation, Danny explained. Miles kept records of everything, partly for his own protection and partly because he's obsessive-compulsive. If someone got hold of those records and knew how to use them, where are the records? That's the million-dollar question. Miles was paranoid about keeping them in his office or his house, somewhere secure, somewhere only he knew about. What about Rachel? Would she know? Maybe. If anyone would know Miles's secrets, it would be her. After Danny left, Tom and I sat in the kitchen drinking coffee that had gone cold hours ago. Lauren had gone to bed, but I could hear her moving around upstairs, probably unable to sleep. You know this is insane, right? Tom said. Going up against organized crime to get revenge on your cheating wife? It's not about revenge anymore. It's about protecting Lauren. These people see us as loose ends, potential witnesses who might cause problems. The only way to change that is to make ourselves more dangerous to them than they are to us. And how exactly do you plan to do that? By finding Miles's records and using them as leverage. If we can prove what they've been doing, document their crimes, we can make it clear that anything happening to us would bring unwanted attention. Tom was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup like it might contain answers to questions he was afraid to ask. Eli, there's something else you need to know. About Rachel. About the timing of all this. Something in his voice made my blood run cold. What? Lauren's birthday is in March, right? March 15th. You know it is. You've been to 19 birthday parties. And when did you and Rachel get married? June 22nd. Tom, what the heck are you getting at? He reached into his wallet and pulled out a small photograph, creased and faded with age. It showed Rachel and Tom together at what looked like a party, her head on his shoulder, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. This was taken the night before your wedding, Eli. Rachel came to me, said she was having doubts, that she wasn't sure she was ready to be married. One thing led to another. I stared at the photograph, my mind doing math that I didn't want to complete. March 15th, 9 months before June 22nd. You son of a witch. I never knew for sure. She never said anything, and Lauren looks like both of you, so I thought maybe, but lately I've been wondering. The way she looks at me sometimes, the way she acts around me. I stood up so fast my chair fell over backward. 23 years of marriage, 19 years of raising a daughter I'd love more than life itself, and now this. The ultimate betrayal, delivered by my own brother with the casual cruelty of someone dropping a bomb in my living room. Get out! Eli, listen to me. Get out! Tom stood up slowly, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. I'm sorry. I should have told you years ago. You should have kept your hands off my wife. She wasn't your wife yet. The words hung in the air between us like a lit fuse. I felt my hands clench into fists, felt 20 years of construction work and 40 years of life coiling in my muscles like a spring under tension. One more word, I said quietly. Just one more word, and I'm going to put you through that wall. Tom nodded and headed for the door. He paused in the doorway, looking back at me with something that might have been regret. For what it's worth, Eli, Lauren's the best thing that ever happened to either of us. No matter who her biological father is, you're the one who raised her. You're the one she loves. Don't let this destroy that." After he left, I sat alone in my kitchen, surrounded by the wreckage of everything I'd believed about my life. My wife was a criminal. My brother was a betrayer. My daughter might not be my daughter. But as I sat there in the darkness, I realized that Tom was right about one thing. Lauren was the best thing that had ever happened to me. Biology be damned. She was smart and strong and brave, and she deserved better than a world where the people she loved spent their time destroying each other. I picked up my phone and dialed the number Danny had given me for a private investigator who specialized in financial crimes. It was after midnight, but he answered on the second ring. "This is Eli Carver," I said. "I need to hire you to find some missing documents, and I need you to start tonight. If Rachel and Miles wanted to play games with dangerous people, fine, but they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd forgotten that I was dangerous too." The private investigator's name was Marcus Webb, and he looked exactly like what you'd expect from someone who made his living digging up other people's secrets. Mid-40s, average height, the kind of forgettable face that could blend into any crowd. But his eyes were sharp and calculating, and when he shook my hand at 6 a.m. in the parking lot of an all-night diner, his grip suggested he was stronger than he looked. "Mr. Carver, I've been doing some preliminary research based on what you told me last night. Miles Ashcroft is a very careful man, but careful men sometimes make predictable choices." We sat in a corner booth, and Marcus spread out a collection of photographs and documents like a detective in a crime movie. Property records, bank statements, surveillance photos of Miles entering and leaving various buildings around town. He's got 3 possible locations where he might keep sensitive documents. His office, which is too obvious and probably compromised now that he's been arrested. His house, which is currently being searched by federal agents. And a storage unit he rents under a false name about 20 miles outside of town. "How did you find out about the storage unit?" "I have my methods. The question is, do you want to know what's in it?" I thought about Lauren, probably getting ready for school right now, trying to pretend that her world hadn't exploded overnight. I thought about Rachel, sitting in a hospital bed planning her next move. I thought about the men in expensive suits who'd made it clear that my family was now on their radar. Yes, I want to know everything. The storage facility was one of those sprawling complexes that had sprung up in small towns across America, rows of identical metal buildings where people kept the overflow of their lives. Marcus had done his homework. He knew which unit Miles rented when he typically visited, and how to bypass the security cameras. "Unit 247, he said, pointing to a building about halfway back in the complex. "He comes here every few weeks, usually stays about an hour, always alone." "How do we get in?" Marcus smiled, and for the first time, I saw something predatory in his expression. "We don't break in, Mr. Carver. That would be illegal. But if someone happened to leave the unit unlocked, and if someone happened to walk by and notice that it was open, well, that would just be curious citizens investigating a potential security breach." The lock on Unit 247 was a heavy-duty deadbolt that looked like it could stop a tank. But Marcus had tools that made it look like a child's toy. And within 5 minutes, we were standing inside Miles Ashcroft's secret archive. It was like stepping into the command center of a criminal enterprise. Filing cabinets lined the walls, each drawer labeled with codes that probably meant something to Miles but looked like gibberish to me. A desk sat in the center of the room, covered with ledgers and computer printouts. And on the walls, like some kind of twisted art gallery, were photographs of properties, people, and transactions that told the story of a money laundering operation that was bigger and more sophisticated than I'd imagined. "Jesus Christ," Marcus whistled. "This guy documented everything." I walked over to one of the filing cabinets and pulled open a drawer marked RC, Rachel Carver. Inside were folders containing copies of bank statements, property deeds, photographs, and what looked like a complete dossier on my wife's involvement in Miles's operation. The photographs were the worst part. Rachel and Miles together at restaurants, hotels, business meetings. The dates went back 3 years, not 2 as Danny had suggested. 3 years of my wife living a double life, playing the role of suburban housewife while secretly helping to launder money for organized crime. "Mr. Carver, you need to see this." Marcus was standing at the desk, holding a ledger that was open to a page marked with yesterday's date. It was a list of names and amounts, and at the top of the list was RC. Final payment, $500,000. "She was planning to disappear," I said. the pieces finally clicking into place. The accident wasn't part of the plan. She was supposed to get one final payment and then vanish. Looks like it. And look at this. He handed me another document, a property deed for a house in Costa Rica. The buyer was listed as Rachel Morales, but the photograph attached to the paperwork was definitely my wife. She had a whole new identity prepared. New name, new passport, new life. She was going to take the money and run, probably leaving you and your daughter to deal with the consequences. I felt something cold and hard settle in my chest, a kind of rage that went beyond anger into something more primal. Rachel hadn't just betrayed our marriage. She'd been prepared to abandon Lauren, to leave our daughter vulnerable to the kind of people who solve problems with violence. There's more, Marcus said. Look at this. He showed me a folder labeled Insurance, and inside were photographs of me, Lauren, our house, my work sites. Surveillance photos taken over a period of months, documenting our routines, our habits, our vulnerabilities. They were planning to end us, I said, the words coming out flat and emotionless, or at least make sure you couldn't cause problems. Your wife was covering all her bases. I closed the folder and looked around the storage unit at the evidence of years of careful planning and systematic betrayal. Rachel hadn't just been having an affair. She'd been systematically destroying our family while preparing to profit from its destruction. We need to copy everything, I said. Every document, every photograph, every piece of evidence, and then we need to use it. Use it how? To make sure that Rachel and Miles and their business partners understand that we're not victims. We're not going to disappear quietly. We're going to be the biggest problem they've ever had. We spent the next 4 hours methodically photographing and copying every document in the storage unit. Marcus had brought professional equipment, and by the time we were finished, we had a complete digital archive of Miles's operation. What's your plan? Marcus asked as we locked the unit and prepared to leave. First, I'm going to make sure Lauren is safe. Then I'm going to have a conversation with Rachel, and then I'm going to start applying pressure until something breaks. These people don't respond well to pressure, Mr. Carver. They respond with violence. Then they're going to be disappointed, because I'm not the kind of man who backs down from a fight, especially when it involves my daughter. As we drove back toward town, my phone rang. Lauren's number. Dad, where are you? I came home for lunch and you're not here. I'm on my way, sweetheart. Stay in the house, lock the doors, and don't answer them for anyone except me. Dad, you're scaring me again. I know, but I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Yes. Good. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I hung up and pressed harder on the accelerator. The game was about to begin in earnest, and I needed to make sure Lauren was protected before I started making enemies. But as I drove through the familiar streets of Carver's Crossing, I realized that I'd already made enemies. The only question now was whether I was smart enough and ruthless enough to survive what was coming. Because, one way or another, Rachel was going to pay for what she'd done to our family. And if her business partners wanted to make this personal, I was more than happy to oblige them. After all, I'd spent 20 years learning how to tear things down. Now I was going to put that knowledge to good use. Lauren was waiting for me in the kitchen when I got home, her laptop open on the table, and a determined expression on her face that reminded me uncomfortably of Rachel at that age. I've been doing research, she said without preamble. Miles Ashcroft, his business dealings, his associates. Dad, this is bigger than just an affair. I sat down across from her and looked at what she'd found. News articles about suspicious real estate transactions, court documents from civil suits, a pattern of business relationships that painted a picture of systematic corruption. How much do you know? I asked. Enough to understand that Mom isn't just cheating on you. She's been helping this man launder money for criminals, and now we're all in danger because of it. I studied my daughter's face, looking for signs of the innocent 19-year-old who'd kissed my cheek that morning. She was still there, but something else was emerging. A hardness that came from having your illusions stripped away too quickly. What do you want to do about it? I want to fight back. I want to make them pay for what they've done to us, to our family, but I want to do it smart, not just angry. I showed her the photographs and documents Marcus and I had collected from the storage unit. Lauren went through them methodically, her face growing paler with each revelation. She was going to leave us, she said finally. She was going to take the money and disappear and let us deal with the consequences. Yes. And Uncle Tom? He's my biological father? The question hung in the air between us like a loaded tool. I'd been dreading this conversation, trying to figure out how to explain that the man she'd called uncle for 19 years might actually be her father. It's possible. We'd need a DNA test to know for sure. Lauren was quiet for a long moment, staring at the photograph of Rachel and Tom together. When she looked up, her eyes were dry but furious. "It doesn't matter," she said. "Biology doesn't make someone a father. You raised me. You loved me. You're the one who taught me right from wrong, who helped me with homework, who scared away the monsters under my bed. Tom's just some guy who happened to contribute DNA." I felt something tight in my chest loosen for the first time in days. "Thank you." "For what?" "For being exactly the person I raised you to be." She smiled. And for a moment she looked like the little girl who used to climb into my lap to read bedtime stories. Then the moment passed, and she was back to business. "So what's our plan?" Our plan, as it turned out, was elegant in its simplicity. We were going to use Miles's own documentation against him and his associates, but we weren't going to turn it over to the police. Instead, we were going to use it as leverage to ensure our own safety while systematically destroying the lives of everyone who'd threatened our family. The first step was a visit to Rachel. She was being discharged from the hospital that afternoon, and I was there to pick her up. She looked fragile and uncertain as a nurse wheeled her to the lobby, but I could see the calculation in her eyes as she tried to figure out how much I knew. "Eli, thank God you're here. I've been so worried about Lauren, about what she must be thinking. She's thinking that her mother is a lying, cheating criminal who was planning to abandon her family and flee the country with stolen money." Rachel's face went white. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Unit 247 at the Riverside Storage Complex. Ring any bells?" The color drained completely from her face, and for a moment, I thought she might faint. Instead, she straightened up in the wheelchair and looked at me with something approaching respect. "How much do you know?" "Everything. The money laundering, the fake identity, the surveillance photos of our family, the plan to disappear to Costa Rica. Everything." "Then you know how dangerous this situation is, for all of us." "Yes, I do, which is why you're going to help me fix it." We drove home in silence, Rachel staring out the window at the familiar streets of Carver's Crossing, like she was seeing them for the last time. Maybe she was. Lauren was waiting in the living room when we arrived, and the look she gave her mother could have frozen the devil's fire. "Hello, Mom. Have a nice trip?" Rachel tried to smile, tried to slip back into the role of loving mother, but it was too late for that. The mask had been stripped away, and we could all see what was underneath. "Lauren, sweetheart, I know this looks bad, but you have to understand. I understand that you were planning to steal $500,000 and disappear to Costa Rica while leaving Dad and me to deal with your criminal associates. I understand that you've been living a double life for 3 years while pretending to be a loving wife and mother. What I don't understand is how you could do that to people who loved you." Rachel sank into her chair, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked genuinely defeated. "It wasn't supposed to happen this way. Miles and I, we were just going to make some money and get out. Clean money from real estate investments. But then it got complicated and we got in deeper than we intended." "Bees," I said. "You knew exactly what you were doing. You documented it, planned it, prepared for it. The only thing you didn't plan for was getting caught." "So what happens now?" I sat down across from her and pulled out a manila folder containing copies of some of the more incriminating documents from Miles's storage unit. "Now you're going to help us clean up the mess you made. You're going to contact Miles's associates and make it clear that any attempt to harm Lauren or me will result in every piece of evidence we've collected being turned over to the FBI, the IRS, and every major newspaper in New England. They'll end me. Maybe they'll decide that leaving us alone is a better option than dealing with a federal investigation. That's your gamble to make." Rachel looked through the documents, her face growing paler with each page. "Where did you get these?" "Does it matter? The point is, we have them and we're prepared to use them. Your criminal friends need to understand that we're not victims. We're a threat, and threats get respected in ways that victims don't. And if I refuse, then Lauren and I disappear, the evidence gets released, and you deal with the consequences on your own. Your choice." Rachel was quiet for a long time, weighing her options. Finally, she looked up at me with something that might have been admiration. "You've changed, Eli. The man I married would never have done something like this." "The man you married trusted you. That man is gone." She nodded slowly. "What do you need me to do?" Over the next hour, we laid out the plan. Rachel would contact the key players in Miles's organization and arrange a meeting. She would make it clear that any retaliation against our family would result in immediate exposure of their entire operation. She would also sign over her share of the legitimate assets from their real estate deals to Lauren's college fund, keeping only enough money to start over somewhere far from Carver's Crossing. "And Miles?" she asked. "Miles is going to prison. His cooperation with federal investigators might reduce his sentence, but his money laundering days are over. He won't like that. I don't care what he likes. He involved my daughter in his criminal enterprise. He put her life at risk. As far as I'm concerned, he's lucky to be in jail where I can't get to him." Rachel made the phone calls that afternoon, speaking in the kind of coded language that criminals use when they know their conversations might be monitored. I listened to her explain the new reality to people who were used to getting their way through intimidation and violence. "It's done," she said after the last call. "They're not happy, but they understand the situation. As long as the evidence stays private, they'll leave you and Lauren alone. And if they don't, then we all have bigger problems than a failed marriage." That evening, after Rachel had packed her things and left for a hotel across town, Lauren and I sat on the front porch, watching the sun set over Carver's Crossing. The town looked peaceful and normal, like nothing had changed, but I knew that was an illusion. Everything had changed, and there was no going back. "Do you think we did the right thing?" Lauren asked. "I think we did what we had to do to protect ourselves." Whether that's right or wrong is a question for philosophers. What happens now? Now, we rebuild. We figure out how to be a family without Rachel, how to trust people again, how to move forward without forgetting the lessons we've learned. And Mom, I thought about Rachel, sitting alone in a hotel room, probably planning her next move. She'd lost her family, her home, her carefully constructed double life. But she was alive, and in the world she'd chosen to inhabit, that counted as a victory. Your mother made her choices. Now she gets to live with the consequences. Lauren was quiet for a moment, then leaned against my shoulder the way she used to when she was little. "I love you, Dad. No matter what the DNA test says, no matter what Uncle Tom did or didn't do, you're my father. That's never gonna change. I love you too, sweetheart, more than you'll ever know." As the last light faded from the sky, I thought about the past week and how quickly a normal life could transform into something unrecognizable. I'd learned things about my wife, my brother, and myself that I'd never wanted to know. I'd made enemies and allies, discovered strengths I didn't know I possessed, and found out that the line between victim and perpetrator was thinner than I'd ever imagined. But I'd also learned that family wasn't just about blood or marriage certificates. It was about the people who stood by you when everything else fell apart, who loved you despite your flaws, who were willing to fight for you even when the odds were impossible. Rachel had chosen money and excitement over love and loyalty. Tom had chosen momentary pleasure over lifelong trust. Miles had chosen crime over honest work. I'd chosen to fight for my daughter, and she'd chosen to fight beside me. In the end, that was all that mattered. 2 weeks later, the FBI arrested 6 members of Miles's money laundering network based on an anonymous tip that led them to a storage unit full of incriminating evidence. Miles pled guilty to federal charges and received a reduced sentence in exchange for his cooperation. Rachel disappeared one night, leaving behind only a note saying she was sorry and a bank account with enough money to pay for Lauren's college education. Tom tried to call several times, but I never answered. Some betrayals were too deep to forgive, and some relationships were too damaged to repair. Lauren and I stayed in Carver's Crossing. We sold the house and bought a smaller place across town, somewhere without memories of Rachel's lies and deceptions. Lauren finished her degree and got accepted to law school, saying she wanted to help people who'd been victimized by criminals. I kept working construction, building things that would last, creating order out of chaos. It was honest work, and after everything we'd been through, honesty mattered more than I'd ever realized. Sometimes, late at night, I wondered what would have happened if I'd chosen differently. If I'd been the kind of man who ran from trouble instead of confronting it, who accepted betrayal instead of fighting back, who chose safety over justice. But those thoughts never lasted long. Because every morning, Lauren would kiss my cheek and head off to school, and I'd remember why I'd made the choices I did. Family was worth fighting for. Truth was worth pursuing. And sometimes, the only way to protect the people you love was to become someone you'd never imagined you could be. In the end, that was the most important lesson of all.